Hey everybody, Rich Straffolino here. Thanks for joining us for the Gestalt IT Rundown. We're streaming live on Facebook as we are wont to do. If you're watching this on Facebook, so I don't know why I had to explain that, but those are the rules of the game. If you're watching on YouTube later, it's too late for Facebook. I'm sorry. No one's ever been sad that they missed Facebook, so I guess you're lucky. I got Tom Hollingsworth over here on the other side where my thumb isn't pointing, and he is going to be running down the IT news of the week with me. Tom, are you excited?
Yes.
Okay. It's
Sorry, let me try that again. Are you excited? There you go.
Tom, this is my life's work. Please don't mock. Are you ready to get going here, Tom?
Yes, let's do this thing.
Let's do this thing we call life. All right. In 3, 2, 1. Hello all and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, your weekly look at the IT news of the week. I'm your host, Rich Straffolino. I'm an editor with Gestalt IT. Joining me from across this great nation of ours, but ever close to my heart, is the one, the only Tom Hollingsworth. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Rich. It's a great day to make your bed.
Absolutely, and it looks like the networking gods are being kind to us right now. It looks like everything's running smooth, so let's get it started. Ordinarily, we do something called News or Now, where we kind of run down some of the lesser headlines and determine if they are newsworthy or not. This time, though, there was a lot of stories about regulation, so we're going to do something called Regulation Roulette. Yes, that's right. We're going to be running through these regulatory stories, and Tom's going to tell me how likely these situations are to kind of pan out in any kind of meaningful regulation down the road. We're going to get started with New York State Attorney General Letitia James. Her office announced that they're launching a multi-state investigation into Facebook for potential antitrust violations. Attorneys General from Colorado, Florida, Iowa, Nebraska, North Carolina, Ohio, Tennessee, and the District of Columbia, which is not a state, will be part of the investigation, looking at if Facebook's actions may have endangered consumer data, reduced the quality of consumers' choices, or increased the price of advertising. Facebook revealed in July that it's facing an antitrust investigation from the U.S. Federal Trade Commission as well. So, Tom, how likely are we to see anything come out of this?
3. Facebook's a good target, but they have deep pockets and can lobby their way out of this.
All right, next up here, we have the European Competition Commissioner, Margrethe Vestager. She announced that the examination into the Libra cryptocurrency to see if it would harm competition. Vestager sent questions out last month to all 28 members of the Libra Association, asking about conditions for membership, how consumer data was being handled, and how Libra-backed products would be integrated into Facebook platform. We've seen the Competition Committee kind of lay the hammer down on big tech, so how likely are we to see something meaningful come out in terms of regulation here, Tom?
5, the Europeans don't play around, and especially they have a thing for Facebook.
And so does our regulation roulette. Next up here, we have attorneys general from 48 states, the territory of Puerto Rico, and the District of Columbia, which is possibly designated as not a state, announced an antitrust investigation into Google. Texas State Attorney General Ken Paxton made the announcement they made the announcement he's taking the next step to the U.S. Supreme Court. The investigation will focus on advertising practices, but other points of inquiry may be included. Other attorneys mentioned search ranking and protecting personal information as other areas of concern. So it sounds pretty wide-ranging, and they have a willingness to kind of see this all the way through. Attorneys General from California and Alabama are not involved. Those would be the two of there are 50 states, if you're not aware, 48 states, so those would be included. So how likely are we to see investigation? Pretty wide-ranging, tons of states involved here, going after Google, who seems to suddenly be the new hot target.
2, there's no law that they can prosecute them for. And the one place that they could, California, is staying out of it.
Yeah, and they may be pursuing that more on a state. There may be some legislative will to do that as opposed to something a little bit more a judicial remedy for that. So that may be why they're staying out of this. And Alabama, maybe they just really like Google. I don't know.
Yeah.
And finally, 51 tech CEOs, including those from Amazon, AT&T, Dell EMC, IBM, Qualcomm, SAP, Salesforce, the list goes on here, signed and sent an open letter to congressional leaders asking for a federal law on user data privacy to supersede the growing issues of state-issued privacy laws like the California one, the Vermont data broker law that we also have talked about on the show as well, arguing that one law governing all user privacy and data protection across the U.S. would simplify product design, compliance, and data management. they go onto it a little bit with this open letter. But, Tom, trying to get ahead of a bevy of state level privacy laws, how likely are we to see tech leading the charge for federal national privacy laws in the US?
This will not happen. This is a one. This is a show. And here's the reason why. You know why they want people to have a national thing? Because they can argue and lobby and get what they want in there. California has a really strict law, and it's scaring the hell out of them.
Now, obviously this is different from GDPR in the way that the US is constituted versus the European Union, where, GDPR is a European Union law, but is then filtered down to the individual countries for implementation, which we've seen has caused a wide variety of enforcement and practices and how that actual process goes down. A federal privacy law obviously would be much more uniform. I'm interested to see, kind of the political ones, who is receptive to this kind of approach, this kind of tech forward design of this letter, and to see where that goes from there.
Yeah, well, here's hoping, but I'm not hopeful.
All right, let's get into our main discussion here, Tom. First up here, AWS released Amazon Quantum Ledger database. Kind of lets you down after the quantum there. This is a rare blockchain project that's actually about just being a ledger. This provides a managed blockchain service with an immutable, cryptographically verifiable ledger for applications that require a central trusted authority. It's designed to operate like a standard database, so organizations kind of already know their way around, and it uses document-oriented data modeling to support structured and unstructured data, so all of your pictures of sheep for your machine learning training models, you can throw in there as well. This joins Amazon's managed blockchain as AWS expands into this, kind of emerging blockchain services market. Is this an actual use for blockchain that might be meaningful to the enterprise now?
Your question has two parts. Is this a meaningful use for blockchain? Yes. Is it going to have any real impact on the enterprise? No. Nobody cares about blockchain. If people cared about blockchain, well, it'd be like SDN. It'd be everywhere now. And it is, and nobody's using it.
Well, so is the key to using these kind of blockchain technologies is to make them not about blockchain, right? This is a ledger that's essentially operating like a standard database that just happens to use, this immutable, cryptographically secure methodology, right? Is that the way that if we're going to see any kind of major blockchain adoption for projects like this, do you think Amazon has the right idea here, or is this just for fringe use cases?
This is the thing. If you'd have made this press release and not said the B word, people would have been all over it. The minute you say blockchain, people are like, oh, you're chasing VC dollars, which is funny when you consider that it's Amazon releasing it. They're not chasing VC dollars. They're chasing people with VC dollars to spend. And I know this sounds cynical, but the problem is that at the end of the day, release the technology and stop putting like catchy labels on it and people will use it.
So you're saying they should open source this and then sell the support for it?
Why not? That's what they do with everything else.
All right, well, maybe Amazon will learn some manners, and that's what the Mutually Agreed Norms for Routing Security stands for. It's an initiative that's launched Observatory, a tool designed to provide visibility into how well networks and ISPs follow routing security standards. This tracks routing incidents like BGP leaks by both region and country, so you can kind of get a wider geographical span or nail down to the country. Sadly, there's no state level where we're looking at something like the US yet, although I imagine that wouldn't be too hard for them to implement. The information is pulled from third-party sources, as well as Manner's 200 members, which manage over 800 internet exchange points, including tier 1 network operators, Microsoft and Google, so they have some weight behind them here. More visibility is always better, Tom, but can this provide anything actionable?
No. I mean, it's great to have a naughty list, so you know to watch out for the people who are yanking prefixes from the table, or those folks in China who accidentally send the entire routing table through their great firewall for 5 minutes. This is just telling people things they already know, giving them a centralized place to do that. I mean, we already have great companies like Thousand Eyes and other ones that are giving us this data, and we kind of already know who the bad actors are. Just putting it in one central place. Okay, great.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to have that single pane of glass, but this might be really great if there is a huge national trend that's over time, like we see, China or another country that, for whatever reason, we're maybe a little skeptical of their motives. All of a sudden, we're seeing all tons of BGP leaks and stuff like that. That being said, unless you can really drill down to some specifics, and this is just the start of that information, It's interesting. I think it might be useful, a useful research project, but yeah, how actionable, I do have my questions.
Yeah.
All right, well, it wouldn't be the Gestalt IT rundown without some exploit news, and millions of mail transfer agent XM servers are vulnerable to a root privilege access exploit. Yay! It affects all versions up through 4.92.1, which is all versions of it because the patch is the .2 patch that kind of fixed it. If the XM server is configured to accept incoming TLS connections, an attacker can send a malicious /null sequence attached to the ending of an SNI packet and run malicious code with root privileges, which I believe, Tom, in the business is known as bad. Considering that XM runs on 57% of email servers and comes bundled with a ton of Linux distros, this is not exactly great. Like I said, a patch is out now, but research by ZDNet found over 5 million servers running vulnerable versions online after already publishing the story. They had published an update to that, and after the patch was already in the wild. The flaw was found in June, and it hasn't been exploited in the wild as far as anyone has seen, but the researchers have said now that it's known that this exploit is out there, implementing it is trivial. I mean, we're talking about a / essentially just like a null field to get this kind of access. It's possible to mitigate the exploit by disabling TLS, but this would expose email traffic in clear text, which, if that gets intercepted, causes all sorts of compliance issues if you happen to be in Europe. Bad or really flipping bad, Tom?
Well, I'd just like to say that /null sequence is my second favorite punk band of all time, so that can't be all bad. This is bad. The reason why, and soapbox for just a second, this is the problem when people use open source products for their internal use. So everybody uses XM as the MTA for their servers. Great. Well, if there's a hole in XM, even though you don't publicly disclose that you use it, you're vulnerable, and now you have to patch your implementation. And so people are going to start asking questions. Well, am I vulnerable because I don't know what MTA you're using? So, you have to stay on top of these things. It's like when Heartbleed came out and suddenly there's a huge hole in OpenSSL or OpenSSL. Guess what? I built using OpenSSL and now I have a problem. So, this is bad. It's fixable if you're patching. And in the words of my friend Bob Plankers, patch from Security Field Day 2, because you kind of have to stay on top of these things.
Patch all the things all the time. And just for the record, MTA is essentially like passing on emails from server to server without actually looking at them. It's basically routing for email, right?
So the MTA does two things. It passes mails between transfer agents, so from server to server, and it also passes the email from the receiver into the mailboxes. So if you're familiar with Exchange, the MTA runs on the front end and the mailboxes run on the back end. And
this has nothing to do with the Metropolitan Transit Authority, correct?
No, it doesn't, unfortunately, which is the best transit authority.
All right, up next here, Google released an open source version of its differential privacy library, allowing organizations to build apps that can learn from a large data set without being able to distinguish or re-identify any one individual from that data. The Apache licensed library includes standard statistical functions that would otherwise be hard to build from scratch, includes an additional library for testing, and includes recipes to help devs get started. Will this actually be useful, or is Google just trying to show off some privacy bona fides to a skeptical market here, Tom?
Whether or not it's useful or not doesn't really matter. For those of you who like Pacific Rim, remember the big clock that Idris Elba always screamed at whenever the time to the next incursion happens? There's a big clock behind me that's the time until this product gets killed at Google, and it's currently set at like 3 weeks. Here's why. So Google's trying to prove that they can pull data from a data set without individualizing people. So what you're basically telling me is Google has to do extra programming to prove that they can't identify you, which means that the default state for their database is that it's easier to pick you out of a crowd. And you're going to expect me that out of the goodness of their own heart, they're going to fuzz that?
I mean, they're saying this is the same stuff that they use in Gmail, for a lot of their ad service and stuff like that in there. We've seen Apple certainly make a lot of privacy hay about that as kind of one of their market differentiators, that they've used the term differential privacy, to kind of say how they're able to do things like learn from Siri voice commands and stuff like that, although we now know that they just have people listening to it, so it doesn't really matter. But I found it interesting that they, were open sourcing it so that fear of a product being killed is somewhat mitigated, because it's always going to be, it's always going to be out under this Apache license, and it's kind of out there for people to innovate on. So I feel like Google is again facing a lot of skepticism and maybe hoping to say, hey, we have some good privacy enabling tech that can still allow us to do all this big data stuff that we're known for without being exceptionally creepy.
I feel like I need a Google skepticism beanie with the propeller on it so that anytime Google releases a software product, I can just put it on and go, yeah, we're not going to do anything chaotic evil with this at all.
Chaotic neutral, for sure. Coming up next here, Microsoft published pre-release versions of 2 new Windows utilities under the revamped PowerToys brand as an open source project on GitHub, speaking of open source. The first is a Windows key shortcut guide that activates by holding down the Windows key and provides a full screen overlay with dynamic keyboard shortcuts based on the apps that are open. So, you can, if you have Audacity open, it'll show you all the shortcuts just for that app and any others that you have kind of in the foreground. The second utility is a Windows manager called Fancy Zones, which lets users set up custom zones on screen. Essentially, it's kind of a customizable Windows snap function, which I think is really cool. PowerToys first came out with Windows 95. Did you ever use them back in the day, Tom? And any of this sound interesting to you? I know you're in the Mac camp, so utility may be limited.
So I am a fan of Windows 95. I actually went out and bought it the day it was released. I almost accidentally bought it on floppy. That was a mistake. But PowerToys to me is a huge aspect of what's been missing in Windows for a while. So first of all, I heart PowerToys. The reason why is because PowerToys specifically speak to power users and people who want to do different things in Windows and not wait on these, what are we on now? Quarterly release schedules for little features that get buried. By having a channel, because that's what this is. PowerToys in and of itself, okay, good idea with just snapping to Windows and stuff like that. But this is now a channel that you can subscribe to get extra functionality built into Windows. And yes, day to day, my driver is, iPad and Mac. But there's also a Windows 10 machine over here that I use quite frequently for other things. And it's nice to be able to see that, now that we've kind of got this nebulous Windows 10 as the future and it'll all be Windows 10 kind of thing, it's nice to know that they're giving us that are actually power users a little bit of functionality built into it.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, because the original PowerToys was kind of, this freeware release that was previews of things that Microsoft was working on potentially for other Windows releases. And yeah, again, a modern implementation of that. Speaking to power users, I really think, that as desktop operating systems themselves kind of increasingly feel more niche in a world where everybody's using smartphones, it's a smart idea to really court these power users, but keeping them in GitHub as an open source project. It's not like you're shoving this into the Windows Fall Creator Ultimate Update 2019.2.6 or something like that. So hopefully it can stick around for a little bit.
Yeah.
Next up here, TF Securities analyst Ming-Chi Kuo says his sources indicate Apple will release small circular tags that can be attached to bags, electronics, very similar to how tile tags work. The difference here, though, is that these are going to use ultra wideband, which Kuo believes this is going to be supported with the three new iPhones that just came out. I didn't hear anything specifically about that. So this may still be in the rumor mill. Ming-Chi Kuo has a pretty sterling record for reporting Apple rumors, though, so that may just be something that they're keeping under their belts for now. Ultra wideband is considered more accurate than Bluetooth LE, at least from what I was reading in this release here, Tom. But can you provide a little bit of context? What specific advantage using ultra wideband versus Bluetooth Low Energy would have?
Yeah, so you are right. When you think about location services today, they really use two primary functions. They use Wi-Fi and they use Bluetooth Low Energy or BLE. Wi-Fi gives you great general idea. So I can tell you within, like 4 or 5 meters where something is. BLE can give you better precision up to a meter. So that's why a lot of people are using BLE. The problem is that BLE is super low power compared to Wi-Fi. Now, there's pluses and minuses to that. Ultra wideband sits right in the middle of power consumption. So it uses more than BLE, but not as much as Wi-Fi. It also has more bandwidth available. BLE uses a couple of megabits per second. Wi-Fi obviously goes way up now. Ultra wideband is probably about 8 to 9 megabits per second, which is not good enough to stream video, but good enough to share files. And it has hyper precise locationing. And we're talking on the order of like 2 to 4 centimeters. So I can tell you the difference between looking at you and looking at someone who's just a little bit off. And that's one of the things that I was really interested about, because I am a firm believer that all of the infrastructure that's been built into this Find My thing is not just for phones and not just for Macs. When you look at the cryptographic infrastructure on the back end, phones can already tell you where they're at. This is for finding things that are not phones. And it looks very much like what Tile has built, only using ultra wideband. Now, why would you need to know that? Well, one of the things that ultra wideband is really helpful for, BLE is great for telling you within about a meter where you are, right? So think of a bubble around you that's about 3 or 4 feet wide. You know what? Inside that bubble, I can easily tell you that something is here, but I don't know if it's here or here. So there's a lot of room to play around with in that bubble. Ultra wideband is really awesome for 3D. So if you're trying to build a picture of something and you've got, I can tell the difference between something that's when here and here. So that's great for finding stuff and finding stuff that's not a phone. Now, I know that if you look at the releases that people, like if you go to Mac Rumors or 9 to 5 Mac, they'll tell you that ultra wideband's in there. And a lot of my Wi-Fi friends have been talking about this as well. They're really fascinated at the idea of building the social network around it, because that's kind of how they sold it. Ultra wideband is going to basically enable them to create some kind of social network where you can tell where everybody around you has a phone and you can share with them, right? So obviously privacy experts are losing their damn mind right now because, oh my God, I don't want people to know I have an iPhone. Read between the lines, people. So here's the thing. I could almost guarantee you they don't have enough beacons ready to go yet, enough tiles, because everybody's going to want to buy one for their dog, cat, cockatoo, and pet snake so that you'll know where your pets are at all times. And I know this because I've seen that on Twitter. People are like, I'm going to buy 5 for my dogs right now. It's not ready to go yet for the same reason that the 16-inch MacBook wasn't ready to go yet. This is something that's coming next month. I'm going to call it. Ming Chi and I are like this. We're like this.
You all hang out with Mark Gurman, right?
Exactly. Exactly. This is coming next month. This is going to be a huge addition because once they release the new MacBook, which I almost guarantee you will have an ultra wideband chip in it, they are going to announce that not only is this a social network, but this is also Find My Everything. So you know how they left off the Find My iPhone, Find My Device? It's going to be my Find My Everything. So you pay, I figure it's probably going to be about $79 for a package of 2 of these things. Hopefully they have replaceable batteries. I've heard that might be a thing, which is weird for Apple when you think about it. But then ultra wideband will allow you to find lost things. And as someone who lost my AirPods earlier this year and just so happened to get lucky and find them, this is a huge deal. This is going to make Apple more than just a device company. Now, ironically enough, they are a device company because you have to have a device to find these things. But this is going to change the way that people look at these things. The social network is just a byproduct of that. This is about cryptographic infrastructure. Remember how I told you ultra wideband is a little bit faster than Bluetooth Low Energy, but not quite as fast as Wi-Fi?
Yes.
Boy, wouldn't it be awesome if you could be able to make device-device calls, device-device text messages without using your cell carrier?
Airdrops?
Yeah.
Just kind of blow up that airdrop.
Airdrop is the build-out in the future for them to be able to do an end run around carriers if they have to.
And the idea also of being very precise in 3D also maybe could be built into, we're hearing a lot of about AR kind of coming to Apple. Being able to have very precise 3D positioning might also be very useful there. And an interesting brief on the technology, Tom, so thank you for that. If people want to find more of your great writing, whether about mobility, networking, or otherwise, where can they find it, Tom?
Well, I'm in a lot of places. So my primary blog is networkingnerd.net. That's a little more analysis focused. But if you want to read some of my technology pieces and some of the briefings that I get from companies on a regular basis, you can go to gestaltit.com. Just search for Tom Hollingsworth. I've got a lot of information up there, and I'm going to be adding more stuff as we go along.
Excellent. And you can find me on Gestalt IT as well, or on Twitter at Mr. Anthropology. That's MR Anthropology. That just about does it for the Gestalt IT Rundown. We'll be back next Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, giving you the IT news of the week. Until then, for myself, for Tom Hollingsworth, for all of us here at Gestalt IT and the studio audience at large, here's wishing you and yours to have a super sparkly day.